Imagine a place so vast and untamed that a person can simply cease to exist, swallowed whole by a landscape that is as beautiful as it is indifferent. For nearly a decade, this was the story of Ethan Hayes. He walked into the Alaskan wilderness to capture its majesty through the lens of his camera and vanished without a trace, becoming another ghost, haunting the endless expanse of forest and mountain. The official narrative was one of tragedy, of a hiker lost to the elements, a cautionary tale whispered among locals. But the truth was something far more sinister, a secret sealed behind a nailed-shut door, waiting in silent darkness for 9 long years. Ethan Hayes was 28 years old, a software developer from Columbus, Ohio, with a passion that pulled him far from the world of code and algorithms. He was an amateur photographer, a man who found his truest sense of self not in front of a computer screen, but behind a camera, seeking out the quiet, monumental beauty of the natural world. He wasn't a seasoned survivalist or a hardened adventurer. He was an ordinary man with an extraordinary appreciation for landscapes untouched by human hands. Alaska, to him, was the ultimate cathedral of nature, a pilgrimage he had planned for years. In September of 2014, he finally made the journey. He rented a small, rustic cabin on the outskirts of Kodiak Point, a remote town that served as a gateway to the sprawling Chugach National Forest. His plan was simple and safe. He would spend a week making short day hikes on well-marked trails, never straying too far from civilization, capturing the first touch of autumn on the Alaskan birch and the stoic grandeur of the surrounding peaks. It was a trip born of hope and artistic ambition. It ended in a way no one could have ever conceived, a quiet disappearance that would morph into a chilling homicide investigation nearly a decade later, when a hidden cabin in the woods finally gave up its dead. The plan was one of cautious exploration. Ethan was keenly aware of his own limitations. He had packed for the variable Alaskan weather, invested in good hiking boots, and purchased maps of the local trail systems. His itinerary, which he had shared with his family, was a testament to his methodical nature. It listed a series of moderate, popular trails, each intended to be a round trip completed well before dusk. He was not there to conquer the wilderness, but to observe it, to respectfully document its raw power and serene beauty. His goal was to return home with a portfolio of photographs, not a story of survival. The day before he disappeared, he spoke with his older sister, Sarah. It was a cheerful, enthusiastic conversation that she would replay in her mind countless times in the years to come. He described the air as being so crisp it felt like breathing life itself. He told her about the sheer scale of the mountains, how they made him feel both infinitesimally small and profoundly connected to the world. He mentioned his plan for the next day, a 3 to 4 hour hike on the Caribou Ridge Trail, a path known for its stunning panoramic views of the adjacent valley and glacier-fed river. He promised to call her the following evening to share stories of his adventure. That promise was the last one he ever made. His final communication was filled with the pure, unadulterated joy of a man living his dream. He expressed no concerns, no sense of foreboding. He spoke of the silence of the forest, a peaceful quiet that he found restorative. He was exactly where he wanted to be, doing exactly what he loved. The conversation ended with a casual goodbye, the kind of farewell that assumes with absolute certainty that there will be another conversation tomorrow. The setting for this unfolding tragedy was a character in itself. The Chugach National Forest is a realm of dramatic contrasts, a place where lush, temperate rainforests climb the feet of jagged, ice-capped mountains. It is a wilderness in the truest sense of the word, sprawling and sparsely populated. The forests are thick with Sitka spruce and western hemlock, the undergrowth a tangled mat of ferns and devil's club. It is home to brown bears, moose, and wolves, animals that command respect and caution. The landscape is a living entity, powerful and unpredictable, capable of both inspiring awe and inflicting swift, unforgiving consequences on the unprepared. It was this immense, indifferent wilderness that would be the primary suspect when Ethan Hayes failed to return. The following evening, Sarah Hayes waited for her brother's call. As the hours ticked by, a familiar sense of sibling annoyance slowly curdled into a nod of genuine concern. She told herself there were a dozen logical explanations. His phone battery had died. He was celebrating a successful day of photography with a beer at the local tavern. He was so exhausted from the hike that he had simply fallen asleep early. She sent him a text message, then another. Both went undelivered. By the next morning, the silence from Alaska felt heavy and ominous. The flimsy reassurances of the night before had evaporated with the dawn. Her hands trembled as she dialed the Alaska State Troopers. She explained the situation to a calm, professional voice on the other end of the line. She relayed the details of her last conversation with Ethan, his location, his intended trail, his promise to call. The trooper assured her they would send someone to check on his rental cabin immediately. The investigation into the disappearance of Ethan Hayes had officially begun, starting with a simple welfare check that would soon escalate into one of the largest search operations the region had seen in years. Troopers arrived at the small rental cabin to find it empty but undisturbed. Ethan's luggage was neatly arranged, his laptop was on the kitchen table, and a half-empty coffee cup sat on the counter. The only things missing were Ethan himself, his camera bag, and the day pack he would have taken hiking. His rental car, a dark blue sedan, was not in the driveway. This confirmed Sarah's account. Her brother had gone out as planned. The first stop for the troopers was the trailhead for Caribou Ridge. There, parked at the edge of the gravel lot, was the rental car. It was locked, and a quick look through the window revealed nothing out of the ordinary. His presence at the trail was now confirmed. A knot of dread tightened in the stomachs of the responding officers. The Caribou Ridge Trail was a well-maintained loop, roughly 5 miles long. For an active man in his late 20s, it should have been a straightforward hike. Yet, somewhere along that 5-mile path, or in the vast wilderness that flanked it, Ethan Hayes had vanished. The initial search was launched with a sense of urgent optimism. A team of troopers and a local search and rescue crew began a methodical sweep of the trail. They called out his name, their voices swallowed by the dense woods. They expected to find him relatively quickly, perhaps with a twisted ankle or disoriented after taking a wrong turn. As the first day of the search concluded with no sign of him, the operation expanded dramatically. By the third day, the search had become a massive undertaking. Dozens of volunteers from Kodiak Point and neighboring communities joined the professional crews. Search dogs, trained for human scent, were brought in, their handlers guiding them through the thick underbrush. A helicopter buzzed overhead, its crew scanning the landscape for any splash of color that didn't belong a blue jacket, a red backpack. The search grid was expanded outward from the trail, covering miles of increasingly rugged and difficult terrain. Each day followed a frustratingly similar pattern. Teams would set out at dawn, filled with a determined resolve, and return at dusk, their faces etched with exhaustion and disappointment. They found animal tracks, discarded water bottles from previous hikers, and stunning, empty landscapes. But of Ethan Hayes, there was absolutely nothing. Not a footprint, not a dropped granola bar wrapper, not a single thread from his clothing snagged on a branch. It was as if he had stepped onto the trail and simply evaporated into the thin mountain air. Investigators considered every plausible scenario. The most obvious was an accident. Had he slipped and fallen from a steep section of the trail? The search teams paid special attention to ravines, cliffs, and rocky outcrops, rappelling down steep embankments to search for any sign of a fall. They found nothing. The terrain was challenging in places, but not treacherous enough to explain a complete and total disappearance. The next theory was a wildlife encounter. The region was known for its significant brown bear population. An attack was a terrifying but real possibility. Forensic experts and wildlife officers joined the search, looking for signs of a struggle, a blood trail, or a bear cache where an animal might have buried a kill. Again, the forest offered no clues. There were no disturbed areas, no torn clothing, no evidence whatsoever of a predatory attack. The silence of the wilderness was absolute. As the search entered its second week, more troubling theories began to surface. Had Ethan decided to disappear willingly? Investigators delved into his life back in Ohio. They spoke to his family, friends, and coworkers. A consistent picture emerged of a happy, stable, and responsible young man. He loved his job, was close to his family, and had been excitedly planning his future. There were no signs of depression, financial trouble, or any personal crisis that might motivate someone to abandon their life. Furthermore, his bank accounts and credit cards remained untouched, a clear indicator that he had not run away. The final, most disturbing possibility was foul play. Had he encountered someone on the trail? The Caribou Ridge Trail was moderately trafficked, especially on a clear autumn day. Troopers interviewed other hikers who had been on the trail that day, but no one recalled seeing a man matching Ethan's description. The idea of a violent crime occurring on a popular trail seemed unlikely, yet as every other theory crumbled under the weight of absent evidence, it lingered as a dark, unprovable suspicion. The search had become an exercise in futility, a desperate fight against a silent, uncooperative landscape. After 3 weeks of intensive searching, the official operation was scaled back. The professionals and most of the volunteers went home, leaving behind a family grappling with an unbearable lack of closure. The formal search was over, but for Sarah Hayes and her parents, the search would never truly end. Ethan's file was moved from missing person to the cold case unit, his face joining the silent chorus of others who had been claimed by the Alaskan wilds. The official theory, the one that offered the simplest, if not the most satisfying, explanation, was that he had suffered an accident in a remote, undiscovered location. The wilderness, they concluded, has simply kept his secret. Weeks turned into months, and months bled into years. For 9 years, Ethan Hayes was a ghost, a memory sustained by the fading hope of his family. The story of the missing photographer from Ohio became a local legend in Kodiak Point, a somber reminder of the wilderness's power. Life moved on. The trail was hiked by thousands of others. The seasons changed, burying the landscape in snow and then revealing it again in the vibrant green of spring. The world continued its relentless forward march. But for the Hayes family, time had stopped in September of 2014. They were trapped in a state of suspended grief, unable to mourn, unable to move on, haunted by the infinite, agonizing possibilities of what might have happened. Then, in the late summer of 2023, 2 state land surveyors were assigned a routine but unusual task. They were to travel deep into the forest, several miles off any established road or trail, to mark the boundaries of a small, isolated parcel of land that had fallen into state possession due to unpaid taxes. It was a forgotten plot, a relic from a time when prospectors and trappers claimed small pieces of the backcountry for themselves. The surveyors, men accustomed to the rugged solitude of the Alaskan interior, navigated using GPS and topographical maps, pushing their way through dense alder thickets and across mossy, uneven ground. After several hours of difficult hiking, they found what they were looking for, an old, rusted metal post marking a corner of the property. As they took their measurements, one of the surveyors noticed something through a thick stand of spruce trees. It was a structure, or what was left of one. It was a small, crudely built cabin, its log walls gray and weathered, its roof sagging under the weight of years of accumulated moss and snow. The structure was so overgrown and dilapidated that it seemed more a part of the forest than something built by human hands. It was not marked on any of their maps. Curiosity piqued. They approached the cabin. It was a simple, one-room affair, barely larger than a garden shed. The single window was boarded up from the inside, and the door was not just closed but secured shut with several large nails that had been hammered through the doorframe and deep into the logs. Thick, rusted heads of the nails stood out against the weathered wood. It was immediately clear that whoever had closed this door had intended for it to remain closed permanently. The air around the small clearing was unnaturally still, heavy with a sense of profound neglect. An instinctual unease settled over the two men. This was not just an abandoned cabin. It was a sealed one. Using a pry bar from their survey equipment, they worked on the door. The old wood groaned in protest, and the rusted nails pulled free with a series of sharp, screeching sounds that seemed to violate the deep silence of the forest. As the door swung inward, it released a rush of stale, musty air. The interior was cloaked in near-total darkness, the only light coming from the now open doorway. As their eyes adjusted to the gloom, the surveyors saw the source of their unease. Seated in a simple wooden chair, facing the boarded-up window, was a human figure. The body was remarkably preserved, mummified by the cold, dry, and sealed environment of the cabin. The skin was leathery and drawn tightly over the skeletal frame. The clothes, a hiker's jacket and pants, faded but intact. It was a macabre, silent tableau, a lonely vigil that had lasted for years. On the floor next to the chair lay a camera, its strap still looped loosely around the figure's wrist. The surveyors backed away slowly, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew, with absolute certainty, that they had stumbled upon the end of a very old story. They hiked out of the woods in silence and made a call that would reopen a case everyone believed had been closed by nature itself. The discovery of the hidden cabin sent a shockwave through the Alaska State Troopers. Cold cases are rarely solved in such a dramatic and unexpected fashion. A team of investigators and forensic specialists was dispatched by helicopter to the remote site. The scene inside the cabin was treated with the meticulous care of an active crime scene. It was a time capsule, a perfectly preserved moment of a long-forgotten event. The investigators documented everything, from the position of the body to the dust on the floor. The remains were carefully transported to the state medical examiner's office in Anchorage. Dental records quickly confirmed what the camera at the scene had suggested. The body was that of Ethan Hayes. After 9 years, he had been found. For his family, the news was a devastating mixture of relief and renewed grief. The not knowing was over, but a host of new, terrible questions now took its place. How did he end up in a sealed cabin miles from the trail? What had happened to him? The autopsy provided the first shocking answer. The medical examiner, while conducting a detailed examination of the skeletonized remains, focused on the delicate bones of the neck. There, he found what he was looking for: a clean, distinct fracture of the hyoid bone. The hyoid is a small, U-shaped bone in the front of the neck, and it rarely breaks by accident. Its fracture is a classic, telltale indicator of manual strangulation. Ethan Hayes had not succumbed to the elements. He had not been the victim of an animal attack or a tragic fall. He was murdered. This forensic breakthrough transformed the entire nature of the investigation. It was no longer a missing person case. It was a homicide. The focus shifted from the wilderness to the cabin itself. Who had built it? Who owned it? Who had sealed Ethan Hayes inside it like a fly in amber? The search for answers began not in the forest, but in the dusty archives of the State Land Registry, property records for the remote, forgotten parcel of land were sparse. But they eventually led detectives to a name: Silas Croft. The records showed that Croft had purchased the small plot of land in the 1970s and had paid taxes on it for 2 decades before the payments abruptly stopped. Further investigation revealed that Silas Croft had died of natural causes in a state-run nursing home 2 years prior, in 2021. He had been 81 years old. Detectives began to build a profile of the cabin's deceased owner. They traveled to Kodiak Point and spoke with a few old-timers who remembered him. A consistent and unsettling picture began to emerge. Silas Croft was a recluse, a man who had lived his entire adult life on the fringes of society. He had worked intermittently as a trapper and a handyman, but mostly he kept to himself. He was known for his eccentric behavior, his deep distrust of the government, and his volatile, paranoid temperament. Locals recalled that he was fiercely territorial. He considered the vast swaths of public forest surrounding his small property to be his own private domain. He was known to confront hikers, hunters, or anyone he perceived as an outsider, often ranting about trespassers and spies. He had a particular animosity towards people with cameras, whom he believed were government agents documenting his activities. As the detectives listened to these stories, a chilling hypothesis began to form. They now had a victim and a prime suspect. What they needed was a direct link, a piece of evidence that could connect Silas Croft to the murder of Ethan Hayes. The answer, they suspected, lay back in the evidence collected from the cabin. While the forensics team had done an initial sweep, a more thorough, painstaking search of the structure and the surrounding property was ordered. The cabin was little more than a primitive shelter, but Silas Croft had lived in a slightly larger, more established homestead about a mile away, a place he had abandoned when his health failed him. It was there, in the decaying remains of Croft's life, that investigators hoped to find the final pieces of the puzzle. The main homestead was in a state of advanced decay, a testament to years of neglect. Inside, amidst the clutter and grime of a hermit's life, investigators found what they were looking for. Tucked away in a rusted footlocker beneath a loose floorboard were several dozen spiral-bound notebooks. They were journals, filled from cover to cover with Silas Croft's cramped, spidery handwriting. For the investigators, opening the first journal was like opening a window directly into the mind of a killer. The entries were a rambling, often incoherent mix of daily observations, paranoid delusions about government conspiracies, and venomous tirades against the modern world. Then, in an entry dated September 17, 2014, the day after Ethan Hayes was last heard, the tone shifted. The handwriting was agitated, the words flowing in a furious torrent. Silas Croft had written a full confession. He described seeing a young man on the trail near his property, a man he called the surveyor or the agent. He had watched him from the cover of the trees, his suspicion and anger growing with every click of the camera's shutter. In Croft's warped perception, Ethan was not a tourist admiring the scenery. He was an intruder, a spy sent to map out his land and report on him to shadowy authorities. The camera was not a tool for art, but a weapon of surveillance. Driven by his paranoia, Croft confronted Ethan. He wrote that he had demanded to know what he was doing there, who he worked for. Ethan, likely confused and startled by the sudden appearance of the disheveled old man, had tried to be polite, explaining that he was just a tourist taking pictures. This explanation only enraged Silas further. He saw it as a lie, a flimsy cover story. He lunged at Ethan, trying to grab the camera. A struggle ensued. Ethan, younger and stronger, could have likely overpowered the old man, but according to the journal, he seemed more intent on de-escalating the situation than fighting. In the midst of the scuffle, Silas Croft, in a fit of pure, unadulterated rage, locked his hands around Ethan's throat. He described the moment with a terrifying, clinical detachment, noting the surprise in the young man's eyes and the brief, desperate struggle before he went limp. He had murdered a complete stranger over a delusional fantasy. The journal then detailed the grim aftermath. Panicked but methodical, Croft dragged Ethan's body through the dense forest back to his old, unused trapping cabin. He wrote that he needed to hide the agent where no one would ever find him. He placed the body in the chair, a bizarre and macabre decision that spoke to the profound strangeness of his mind. He boarded up the window from the inside, and then, after taking Ethan's backpack and hiking poles, he left the cabin and nailed the door shut from the outside. He had sealed Ethan's tomb. In subsequent entries, he never mentioned the incident again. It was as if, having purged his paranoid fantasy with an act of ultimate violence and hidden the evidence, the event was erased from his conscious thought. He went on living his isolated life for 7 more years, a man holding a terrible secret that he had seemingly forgotten himself. The backpack and other contents, he noted in a brief addendum, he had burned in his wood stove a few days later. The only thing he kept, for reasons unexplained, was the camera. It had been the object of his obsession, and he had placed it next to the body, an artifact in a makeshift museum of his own madness. With the chilling confession from the journals, the last pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The motive was not robbery or personal hatred. It was something far more disturbing. A murder born from profound mental illness and paranoid delusion. Ethan Hayes had the profound misfortune of crossing paths with a man whose mind was a prison of imagined threats, a man who saw a spy where there was only a tourist, and who responded to a perceived intrusion with lethal violence. Because Silas Croft was already dead, there would be no arrest, no trial, and no conviction. The legal process ended before it could begin. The Alaska State Troopers held a press conference where they officially closed the case, naming the deceased Silas Croft as the man responsible for the murder of Ethan Hayes. The mystery was solved, but the resolution brought little comfort. The banal and senseless nature of the crime was a bitter pill to swallow. Ethan had not been lost to the grandeur of the Alaskan wilderness, but to the petty, private madness of a single, disturbed individual. For 9 years, the story of Ethan Hayes was a tragedy of man versus nature. It served as a stark warning about the unforgiving power of the wild and the fragility of human life within it. But the final chapter revealed a darker, more intimate truth. The monster that claimed Ethan's life was not the forest, with its bears and its treacherous slopes. The monster was a man, hidden in plain sight, his darkness concealed not by the vastness of the landscape, but by the simple, impenetrable walls of his own isolation and paranoia. Ethan went to Alaska to capture its beauty, but instead, he became a casualty of an ugliness he could have never imagined. A life full of promise, extinguished by a baseless fear in a lonely, troubled mind.